Hello, welcome to the GXM podcast, where we explore news and topics around video game music and the intersection between the games and music industries. We aim to publish fortnightly, so please be sure to subscribe. Joining me, Tom Quillfelt, community manager at Laced Records, is my co-host Matt Ombler, who is head of gaming partnerships at Laced as well. Matt, how has your few weeks been?
I am very sad to report that I am now slogging my way through Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. I have finally hit that point where I'm just kind of going, I really want it to be over now. Like I am doing the same thing over and over again, and as much as the music continues to delight, and honestly that's like the music is the only thing that is consistently throwing fresh stuff at me. I feel like everything else now from a gameplay perspective and just like an environmental perspective, it's like just rinse and repeat now.
Yeah.
So that is upsetting me because I didn't think I'd get bored of it. I thought I'd get to the end and want to start another playthrough, but that's it. I am done.
There's a couple of games I've felt like over the years, The Witcher 3, Assassin's Creed Odyssey, and Elden Ring. Even the mighty Elden Ring, I got to a point where I was just like, exhausted with the game. And I think, a game shouldn't make you feel like you're slogging. That's been overscoped. They made too much game, I think. They put too much overstuffed, I think is a word that was quite common in the reviews for Rebirth. And actually listening to the soundtrack, I'm on track 87 of the soundtrack, Matt. I've been listening for 4.5 hours. Right, this is the Final Fantasy VII Rebirth OST that recently got released. Matt, I am not even halfway through the soundtrack, and I'm 4.5 hours into it. So that should tell you how overstuffed. And this is only, of course, the middle part of a trilogy. But we've talked enough about Rebirth, I think. We talked enough about Tunic, actually. I finished Tunic finally with the kids, and interestingly, I loved the OST already. The music had less of an impact on the vibes of the game than I thought in the end, which is a weird thing to say because I love the soundtrack. I guess my kids are pretty noisy and they talk all the way over everything anyway, but the soundtrack felt like a cool blanket sort of draped over the game. But I don't know that it was totally essential because the mysteries of Tunic are kind of what make it. All of the hidden things, hidden in plain sight, and all the things that, it's one of those games you can only play once, like Outer Wilds. I just had an insanely busy period soundtrack-wise. In the last 2 weeks, or the week before this, I had Resident Evil 3 on vinyl, then I had Braid on vinyl and Firmament, which is a Myst-style puzzle game on vinyl, and then Homeworld 3 digital release and the Braid digital release and the Alan Wake 2 digital release. And that's so many different marketing and social media campaigns that my brain is honestly scrambled between which meme and emojis I'm supposed to use for which game. And I think I need a holiday. This is Tom dropping in at a later point than when we recorded, just to cover off the lead news story. As GameSpot reports, Fortnite Festival is doing something new with its latest artist collaboration. Previously, they'd had Lady Gaga and The Weeknd come into Fortnite Festival and their songs be part of Fortnite Festival and the Jam stage. Of course, Fortnite Festival is the kind of rock band mode within Fortnite, and it is created by Harmonix, which created Rock Band, and Harmonix was acquired by Epic. And the Jam Stage mode is a bit like Harmonix's Fuser sort of DJ mixing game where you can take different elements of different songs and mix them together with friends. So Billie Eilish is introducing 3 new songs from her big upcoming album campaign. And what's interesting is that those are going live in Fortnite day and date, with the songs becoming available to the public elsewhere, which is something new for Fortnite. I wonder whether there will come a time where really big artists will feel confident enough in the Fortnite platform to launch brand new material only in Fortnite and have it, available as interactive music and play experiences. And we can't be far off that, really. Okay, back to Matt and Tom covering the rest of the news. Yeah, and speaking of bringing games to festivals, I saw this on BBC of all places, a BBC News beat. So Shin Megami Tensei 5 is the other RPG series from Atlus, although they are about to add a third kind of plank to what they do, and they're the Persona team. So Shin Megami Tensei actually came before Persona. It's the longer, older series. And it's coming to Download Festival in the UK, which seems like a weird tie-up. So how did this come about?
I think this is like two main things. I think this is one from the BBC piece. I think it was the vice president for marketing at Sega West was quoted basically saying the partnership would be a decent way to get the game in front of new audiences. Two, given this is Download Festival, so like a heavy metal festival, I think there is a natural overlap between metal music, alternative music, and the world of video games. Like, there's a reason Doom has like a hilariously heavy metal soundtrack, and loads of people from the world of metal are digging that. Do you know what I mean? There's a long history of like metal music in video games and like crossovers. I found out today, do you remember the Free Radical game, Haze?
Very, very distantly, yeah.
So I saw something pop up today where it was just a piece from a long time ago. We're talking like 15, 20 years ago or whatever. Korn wrote a song for that game. And I was just like, how have I never heard about this? The video had like 1.5 million views. But anyway, that's testament to this long-standing relationship between metal and gaming. I'd love to see more stuff like this for the time being. And from what everything that I've read on this just seems to indicate, it is basically a lot of console booths just set up in a tent somewhere.
It's such a strange game, though, because so Atlus, with their RPGs, they tend to bring out a revised version.
Yeah.
It's a bit like when you used to get fighting games. Before fighting games had DLC, it'd be like Street Fighter 4 and then Super Street Fighter 4 and, a year later or something. So they tend to add new story content and as a whole new game that's slightly been reworked. So this is Shin Megami Tensei 5 Vengeance, and people might know Persona 5 Royal, Persona 4 Golden. It's that kind of update and expansion of the game, I believe. It's just a very weird pick. But then I guess Sega must be feeling pretty confident with Atlus's properties. Now, Atlus have a new game coming out this year called ReFantasio, which is more of a fantasy title that you wouldn't even normally associate with them. Hopes are high that it'd be a very high quality game. It's a brand new IP, so it's going to be a tricky sell. And as I say, in the West, I don't think the Shin Megami Tensei series is huge. It's certainly not as recognisable as Persona. But it does make me wonder about a Persona 6, which, Persona 5 came out 2016, which is a long, long, long time ago. And it was a hit. It was a big hit and gradually grew as a hit. It eventually came to other platforms, PC, Switch, that kind of thing, Xbox. And presumably Persona 6 will be in the works after they release their big new IP this year. And it makes me think that actually, when Persona 6 eventually appears, it could be a huge global kind of crossover hit. And it's such a stylish game and they pay such attention to their soundtracks as well. It does kind of make sense for them to get out and about with the Atlus properties in particular.
It does, but also I think it's just hilarious that we're talking about JRPGs here, do you know what I mean? This is not like maybe you've had a couple of beers and you walk into a tent and play some Street Fighter a couple of rounds or some Mario Kart and then you go back to the music, do you know what I mean? This is like, we're talking games that last hundreds of hours. So it's not a pick up and play.
Yeah, but in a world of Twitch and streaming and younger people being very familiar with watching people play video games online, presumably they've thought carefully about, where the demo is set in the game and stuff like that. if I squint, it kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
But it doesn't make sense when you first read the read the headline.
I just love the idea of like there being that one guy who maybe gets too drunk and loses his friends and doesn't have any signal, and then he just finds himself in the Sega tent, starts a new file, and like if it's not a demo and it's the full game, he's just blasting that full game for like 8 or 9 hours. Like I just love that mental image in my head. From quirky, flashy JRPGs to the world of medieval fantasy. This is one...
Not fantasy, in
fact. Not fantasy.
Medieval... what's the word? Medieval verisimilitude.
Ooh, that's a word that does not exist within my vocabulary. Not in the whole vocabulary. But yeah, you've been all over this because we've put out the soundtrack, haven't we, for Manor Lords, and it's been going down quite a hit with fans and press.
It has. Well, Manor Lords was this game initially made by one guy who's, as a developer, goes under the name Slavic Magic, which is quite special.
That's great.
And the game has just gone from strength to strength in early access, even before early access, I believe. Like, it was at one point the most wishlisted game on Steam. I think, is it just been launched into early access? So it's not even a 1.0. So Manor Lords is you manage a town in medieval Franconia, I think it is, and there are peasants walking about and animals and farmyards, and you can get into sort of battles with other towns nearby and stuff like that. You know, it's a fairly realistic look at the life of peasantry, essentially, in the countryside. And the story of how the music came together is very, very interesting. It was these folks at a South African kind of music house called Pressure Cooker Studios, and they kind of came across this game as it was in its, you know, nascent state, as it was just getting going, and got in contact with the developer, and they ended up having a very fruitful collaboration. So yes, full disclosure, Laced put out the Manor Lords digital soundtrack recently. It's I think, very beautiful. Lots of really stunning choral work. And then these very like meditative, improvised pieces with people playing very old instruments or instruments from hundreds of years ago, the kind of sounds you would have heard. And Rock Paper Shotgun did a really good profile on it, as well as a couple of other places, Forbes and Cog Connected, but I recommend people check out all of them, but the Rock Paper Shotgun piece especially, to find out more about things like they were using words and music sources from the medieval age and kind of working them into the score alongside original material. And I just think it's a really interesting story, really interesting soundtrack. People should listen to the soundtrack and go and read that piece. We will, of course, link it. Now there's so much news, actually, since we last spoke, Matt. We're going to have to blast through some of these. Do you want to take the first one?
Yeah, so Megan Thee Stallion basically put out a new music video for her track Boa. And whoever has worked on the music video for this, I don't know if it was Megan herself or just a team who lives and breathes video games. There are so many nods to like video games in here. Okay, cool, we've got Mortal Kombat and we've got Tekken, but I did not expect to be using Space Channel 5 and Megan Thee Stallion in the same sentence. The full video is worth a watch. I think you shared it to me and I kind of dismissed it at first because I was like, oh, Megan Thee Stallion in a video game, like music video. It's going to be one of those typical cringy, like somebody trying to get video games. No. Whoever has made this video knows their stuff and knows what they're doing.
Has thought deeply about it because like in like something like Scott Pilgrim, the games come into the world and it's about a whole kind of meta thing. But it's definitely not safe for work. So if you go and check it out, watch it privately maybe. Both for lyrical content and for visual content, I will say. Not for children. So next we got, there's this new genre, shall we say. We had Bullets Per Minute, we had Metal Hellsinger, and now we have Robobeat, which is out now. It's a cyberpunk / synthwave first-person shooter, but the emphasis is to shoot your gun on the beat. So I guess you could kind of include something like Thumper, something like Hi-Fi Rush into this now growing music action genre. I think music action feels like a good descriptor, doesn't it?
Yeah, no, I think that's it. And you know what? I think I'm going to give this a download and play it properly because I really enjoyed Metal Hellsinger. I really enjoy anything that kind of combines action and music. Like, I love those games that look beyond traditional, like, beat matching gameplay mechanics to try and do something new. So I'm going to play this, Tom, and you can hold me to it. Next time we record, I will report back on RoboBeat and let you know what I think.
Sounds good. Now, there's an RPG Kickstarter project that's caught your eye, Matt, presumably because of the composer, but also the vibes. What's going on here?
So, two reasons. So, there's a new JRPG that has just met its Kickstarter funding target of $100,000. It is called Alzara Radiant Echoes. Yes, Motoi Sakuraba, who has worked on countless games from Golden Sun to Dark Souls to the Shining series, like, the man is a prog rock king. Like, he loves prog rock music. I love prog rock music. If that wasn't good enough, the game also references Final Fantasy X and Lost Odyssey as direct influences. So to quote the page, Alzara Radiant Echoes is a clear love letter to Golden Age RPGs, pulling inspiration from the likes of Golden Sun and Lost Odyssey for a 3D turn-based RPG set in a Mediterranean fantasy world. That is 100% up my street. I cannot wait to hear it. The actual main theme song has already been released via G4F Records, so I'm going to whack a link to that in the description. It's what you'd expect from Sakuraba. It's brilliant.
It's funny they say the golden age of RPGs, and then they quote games that released from 2001 to 2007, because, I don't know, I just would have thought the golden age was like 94 to, I don't know, yeah, like 2000 or something. But that's interesting. Maybe it's for a generation below, like a half a generation below me, for people whose first Final Fantasy was Final Fantasy X and not 6 or 7, like a lot of people my age. A lot of oldies. Right, Matt, I took your seat for the Sonic Symphony gig in the Barbican, London, and we reported on this show, actually. Go back and listen to myself and Rich, who goes to every single video game concert there possibly is in the UK,
everyone,
to get our lowdown on how we felt about it. We loved it. We were blown away, actually, by the energy of the band and especially the audience. There's a load of US dates, newly announced US dates here, and I see in amongst them is a little date in London. Are you going to be there, Matt?
So Rich actually messaged me like before tickets went on sale, and then when they went into pre-sale, I was like, tell me the date, I'll double check. I am free. We're nearing birth of child there, but we're still a bit way off. So I looked at it. It's a Saturday. Rich reminded me it's a Saturday because I was kind of like, I'll check my work calendar. He was like, it's a Saturday. I was like, right, you know what? No excuses just yet. You buy the tickets and I'm there. So I sent him the money. He has got me a ticket. I have got my seat. I think it was like £90 or something. But again, it's like, I missed it last time and I know how much I wanted to go.
That's the thing. There's no one else in the universe that it would be worth, double that for, just because of the experience.
As long as it's the same setup where they kind of do the symphony in the first half and then all of the Crush 40 rock music from like Adventure and all of the later games, as long as they stick to that.
I assume it must be because everything's timed to videos. It's a very kind of strictly run show and program.
They swap some songs out there. I've seen the concert producer saying on Twitter, like, they do swap some songs out, but I think they're still going to keep the band. You'd hope, like, they'd still do the symphony and band thing. But yeah, I am there. I will report back. Are you going to come?
No, I really enjoyed what I saw. I probably would rather keep the 90 quid and spend it on a slightly different show, I'll be honest. And I'm not a Sonic, I'm not a big Sonic fan. My kids are getting into it with the movies and Lego sets and stuff, but we're yet to dive deep into the games, I'll put it like that. We're still in a Mario phase, games-wise, in this house. The role-playing musical called Stray Gods, which is music directed by Austin Wintory, is getting some Orpheus DLC. It's set in with the Greek pantheon, set in the modern world. And that's coming out June 27th on PC and then console later. Apparently it's 6 new songs. Now, the way Winturi has sort of suggested is that it was like, drawing blood. It was like an incredibly involved and difficult process getting that game made. I can only hope that their workflow got significantly faster and more enjoyable now that presumably once they shipped the game, they kind of knew how to do it quicker.
Yeah.
And it does make me wonder, actually, they must have put so much effort into the kind of design thinking to make that game that either a sequel or makes more sense to me, like maybe try and get some budget together to do a bigger, musical game next time around, like a bigger scope, bigger publisher, maybe that kind of thing. Now that they've cracked the code, the fact that DLC is coming out suggests to me that they didn't all hate the project so much that they never touched it again. So look, I'm still halfway through it. I still need to finish it. And a couple of other bits on the laced front. I don't mean to push laced things too hard. However, I just felt like these two things were quite significant in the world of video game music, which is that the Alan Wake 2 soundtrack is out on digital. That is the score by Petri Alunko, and actually the 4 chapter songs by an extremely interesting artist called Poe. And she worked very closely with Sam Lake, who is the creator of Alan Wake and Control, to create these really freaky, spooky songs that collectively are known as This Road, but are split into 4 different parts. So that's the album that came out, and already released were the chapter songs by a music company called Fried Music, which are these kind of songs created especially for the game in a kind of synth pop style, I'd say mostly, but also some rap, also some light indie in there. And all round, taken as a whole package, I think people just love the music of Alan Wake 2.
It's amazing.
The vibes that game gives off are just incredible, and so people were loving the fact that this is now available to stream. And I was really bowled over by the reception to it. And then, as I said earlier, we've been working on the Braid Anniversary Edition, which is an expanded sort of glow up for the 2008 indie game, which came out in the golden age of indies, really. There was Braid, Super Meat Boy, Fez, Limbo, Castle Crashers, in a very kind of fertile period for indie games around the Xbox summer live arcade thing. I kind of missed it. I didn't have an Xbox, but got around to playing all those titles eventually. What's interesting about Braid Anniversary Edition, which put out the soundtrack, is Martin Stig Anderson, who actually was the composer and sound designer for Limbo, among those games back then, and since did Inside and various other things, including Control. He came on board to do the Anniversary Edition sound and music. New is interesting because the original Braid had these licensed tracks from a company called Magnatune, because Jonathan Blow didn't want video game bespoke music. He wanted pre-existing compositions by folk artists mainly that he picked out with interesting instrumentals like cello and things like that. But there wasn't enough music to kind of stretch over the whole of this remaster. So he brought in Martin Stig Anderson, who worked very, very hard to remaster the original music. And because the game includes time bending mechanics, which also reverse the music and slow it down, Martin Stig Anderson had to create these very ambient, spacey remixes to go in the game. And the game has significant commentary from all of the creators. And yeah, there's no one more technical than Martin in the field of game audio. He just thinks on such a deep level about sound, frequencies, just everything. It's incredible. And so I recommend people actually, as well, check out the soundtrack, but try and check out the game and check out those commentary nodes about how the soundtrack for the Anniversary Edition was put together. I think it's super interesting.
I am joined by someone who I think knows more about obscure video game music trivia than I do. A man who, no matter what kind of music I tend to discover on YouTube or Spotify or whatever else from the world of video games, if I send it across to him, he's most definitely already heard it. And probably one of the few people who will send me video game music, and I can 9 times out of 10 guarantee that I've never heard it before, because Pierre Crochart is the master of discovering video game music that, one, absolutely slaps, and two, most people are not aware of. Pierre, thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing today?
Thank you, Matt. That's an honor to be here. As you may have heard, I'm very French, so forgive me for my accent. But yeah, I've been a big fan of GXM since the very beginning, so it's a big deal for me to be here.
And just tell us more about your background as well, Pierre, because obviously I know you've got the Now Playing newsletter, which is essentially just an incredible platform for just discovering new music, but also reading interviews with video game composers and stuff like that. But you're also a journalist as well, right?
Yeah, I'm a tech journalist here in France, and I mostly cover smartphones, laptops, that kind of stuff. I write reviews for that type of product. And yeah, on my free time, I'm running a Patreon publication / podcast named Now Playing. It was on Substack before, but now it's on Patreon. And I publish monthly playlists and monthly mixtapes with every VGM track that I find interesting during the month.
And I wanted to invite you on specifically to talk about how to discover new video game music. Yeah. Video games is a music discovery platform, discovering new music through video games. But before we get onto that, can you just tell me a little bit more about how your love affair with video game music started? Like what got you into like this like passion and obsession for all things video game music?
Yeah, so it started as a frustration because there's too many video games out there, and I obviously can't play them all. But what I can do is listen to their soundtrack. At least I can get a little bit of that experience. You know, I can get a sense of what it is about just by listening to its music. So yeah, it became quickly a passion, and I think I developed like maybe not a talent, but a way to discover new music at least. And I enjoy it very much to listen to new music, but because that's what I like in music, to discover new things. I'm not the type of guy who listen to the same song on loop. I can get bored pretty quickly by music, so I need to discover new things. So that's why I started Now Playing in the first place.
And what came first then? Because this is like a question we always ask most of our guests. Like, have you always been a gamer and then got into video game music, or have you always been a really big fan of music in general and then you got into video games? Like, how does that split?
Yeah. I've always been a gamer. I started at the end of the 90s, watching my father play Diablo 2 and Half-Life, that kind of stuff. And then I started to play myself at the beginning of the 2000s. And my father was a musician too. So yeah, there always music in the house when I was young. And then, yeah, the passion for music and gaming grew together. And I really started to be more focused about video game music with Bloodborne in 2015, I think. That was like the starting point where I thought, yeah, okay, this is really cool, and I need to pay more attention to the music in the games I like.
But what I love about what you do is you're uncovering video game soundtracks that I think a lot of people would miss otherwise. So what was it that inspired you to shine a spotlight on smaller games instead? Like, does that come from a desire to uncover something cool and share it with other people, knowing that they might not have heard it otherwise? Or is there something where you want to shine a spotlight on smaller composers that might not get the attention otherwise? Like, what is it that drives you?
It's a little bit of that, but also it's like it's almost like I'm carrying a legacy of a French podcast, which is shut down now. It was called Les Démons du Midi. So it's very French. You couldn't get the pun. So so let's leave it like this. But yeah, that was a podcast that ran for maybe 7 or 8 years during the 2010s. It was a monthly podcast about 2 game journalists in France sharing that their favorite tracks from obscure albums, lesser known games. They had a knack for indie games in particular. So yeah, I got to hear many music from lesser known games thanks to this podcast. They shut the project down, I think in 2020. So I figured, yeah, why not carrying the legacy and trying to do something with what I like to do.
And the big question, which is going to lead us on to everything else, how do you stay on top of all of these new releases that are coming out, and how do you track everything that's coming out? Like, I feel like you're doing the opposite of what I'm doing in terms of my thing is like going onto vgmdb.net and looking at like old stuff. Like, so my passion is like uncovering stuff from like the 80s and 90s, like a really obscure remix album that was only put out in Japan or something. Whereas you're keeping on top of all of these new games coming out. And like you said, like, there's probably more games coming out right now than there ever was like between like the 80s and 90s. Do you know what I mean? So how do you track all of this stuff and find the time to listen to it?
Actually, one of the reasons I started now playing is also because there are a lot of people like you very interested into uncovering hidden gems from the past, you know. But my thing is more to stick with the new stuff. But as you can imagine, that's a lot of work. It's a daily work, actually, because there is no a new video game music section on streaming platform. You have to look for it really hard. So usually I start with the what's new section on Spotify, because I follow something like 500 VGM artists on Spotify. So the instant one of them release a new track or album, I can immediately add it to my ever-growing backlog of music to listen to. But I can't always rely on such platform to find new stuff, because some distributors choose to backdate their album. For example, you have to regularly check the Square Enix page on Spotify if you don't want to miss out on a release. It sometimes takes several years for an OST to actually show up on platforms. Square is going to backdate the album close to the game's original release date. For example, Octopath Traveler 2, the Spotify page says it was released on March 1st of 2023, but it actually came out last February. So, of course, for Square Enix, there's always some form of communication, even if it's just a tweet or a press release. But it can get very tricky when you want to keep track of smaller, lesser-known indie games. So sometimes I just happen to type the name of a game on Spotify and the soundtrack magically comes up. But yeah, it's a bit hit or miss sometimes.
That's so much music just to be like taking in. Have you got a way of knowing how many albums you might listen to on like a weekly, monthly basis, or maybe even like how many video game soundtracks you've listened to so far in like 2024?
Not necessarily on a weekly basis, but I can tell you that in 2024 alone, there are already been 487 albums, VGM albums that came out on Spotify. And I've listened to every one of them.
Every one?
Yeah. Every single one, I give it a shot, yeah.
So if you're listening to that many albums, like, you must be picking up on trends and stuff as well in terms of like genres. And is there anything that you've noticed so far?
Orchestral music is still going strong, really strong. Sometimes it's most of the time actually it sounds a bit cheap because it's from indie composers. It's only virtual instruments, you know, so they don't sound really well all the time. But there are also revival of everything Y2K with drum and bass, jungle, electronic music still going strong. I'm a bit surprised that the Mick Gordon style of gent metal was not that big of an influence of VGM in general, because I know you're a big fan of Tripang 2, but apart from Tripang 2, there's not that much heavy metal VGM album out there. I would say that the top 3 genres on my list is orchestral, electronic, and neo-retro music like 8-bit, chiptunes, etc. It's not very precise, but VGM albums are really only one style, one genre of music, so it's a bit difficult for me to pin down exactly what type of music it is.
And in terms of platform uploads, do you notice that the people who are publishing to Spotify, in most cases, is their music also going up on YouTube and Bandcamp and everything else? Or do you have to jump across various platforms and just rely on Bandcamp for some stuff? Or
most of the time, when a soundtrack is released, it is on every major platform.
Yeah.
On Bandcamp, it's not always the case, because it's more like when a VGM composer don't have a distributor, he's going to put his soundtrack on Bandcamp on his own, but it's not always the case. So most of the time, if a soundtrack is going to be somewhere, it's on Spotify, because it is so essential for artists to be there, even if it's really not the best platform for them to make a living, because it doesn't pay very much. It is the biggest platform out yet. And it is the one I use the most, because for Now Playing, I put together playlists made of tracks that are available on Spotify. So that's the first platform I go to when I'm looking for VGM.
And I know we're going to dive into like some specific track examples that you shared with me. So I guess just for some context, like I asked Pierre to bring me 3 album recommendations that we could chat through. He has gone through the effort of putting together a playlist in advance of his recording, so I've had the time to check those out. And yes, of course, they have absolutely blown my mind. But before we go into that, like the stuff that you send me is not normally what I would consider a typical video game soundtrack. I mean, there's a running joke now on the podcast where we have 2 songs that you've sent us, like GXM, which have just been fart noises.
Yeah.
Like there is some fart style. There we go. Yeah. There's some really weird stuff out there. But do you feel there is more innovation and an experimental approach to composition in indie games, or not necessarily indie games, outside with AAA games? Or is it just a case of the stuff that you're sharing with me is just kind of the more niche stuff, and that can also exist in AAA?
That's an interesting question, because it's a bit difficult for me to know exactly, because as I said, I've listened to almost 500 albums this year already, and most of them are really vanilla video game music, like orchestral or neo-retro. You know, it sounds like a video game, you know?
Yeah.
But there is also, it's true, a lot of albums that if you put some tracks on a playlist, probably you won't even notice that it's from a video game. I think this is because freelance indie composers are have more freedom to experiment with genres, and maybe the brief that the studio is giving them is a bit vague, and they have carte blanche to try new things. So I do think that there's a lot of experimentation, and risk taking in video game music, and this is why I'm never bored, because every day I get to listen to a new genres, even if it's I don't know. There's a lot of K-pop too recently, K-pop, orchestral, bardcore music or stuff like that. So
what is bardcore?
Bardcore is like medieval tavern music, you know.
I love that. Before we dive into your top 3 picks, which we will digest, because I want to know why you chose them and why you think music like this exists in video games, with reference to a particular match 3 game we're going to talk about. What would you say your favorite game soundtrack you've discovered is of the last year? Like, what's a real highlight from the last 12 months?
That's a very, very difficult question for someone who listened to 1,000 albums in the last 12 months. So I try not to overthink it. Just pick 3 out of the top of my head. And so here goes. Let's start with a composer named Shane Berry. Are you familiar with him?
I am not.
Okay, so he's the in-house composer for Demagogue Studio, which released games like Golf Club Wasteland, Highwater, and The Cobb. The 3 games share the same universe, and so does their soundtrack. What's fascinating, I think, about Shane's work is that he didn't compose a score, but he created a full-blown radio station that is shared between the three games. And every single track of the OST is unique. It can be rock, pop, dance, ambient, you name it. And one particular track really stood out for me. Matt, I think I saw that you're a drummer, right?
Is this the track that is basically just an
Absolutely.
unfiltered drum sale?
Absolutely.
Do you know the context for this track? Why somebody just went, let's just do a drum solo?
Yeah. I interviewed Shane Berry for NOWPLAYING, and I asked him about this particular track. So it's called Cool Stride, and it's basically a 6-minute long drum solo. I've never heard that in a video game before. And it was performed by a very popular and really good drummer based in Serbia named Peja Milutinovic Drum Booty. It's really, it's mind-blowing. So they needed a track, a really energetic track for an escape part of the game. I think he told me that he took part when you have to escape from roof to roof. It's a platform game, You are being chased and you have to hurry up to escape the enemies. And he had this very cool idea of a 6-minute long drum solo, and he asked this Peja Milutinovic about it, because they have worked together in Serbia back in the days. They worked in a local radio, if I remember correctly.
It's refreshing to hear like actual live recording acoustic drums in a soundtrack, because that is quite rare. Like normally if you get drums in a video game soundtrack, it's just going to be like a VST or something. Do you know what I mean? Like it's not going to be a real drum kit. This reminded me of Ape Out, which is another amazing game with like a really cool dynamic soundtrack, and it's all jazz based, because that solo basically it's all jazz drums. Do you know what I mean? The way he's working his way around that kit, it's absolutely wild. It's frantic. I've never heard anything like it.
I wish there was a video of the recording.
Oh, did they not get one?
No, I have to ask. I sent in an email right after our interview. I have to know.
I'd love to see that.
Yeah.
What is next on the list? I would love to talk about this acid mix that you sent me.
Absolutely. Yeah. So next up we have Kitten Burst Part C. Part C, because it's actually the third volume of the soundtrack from a game that came out last January. And I guess the best way to describe it is Res Infinite, but you're a cat racing through Y2K inspired levels.
That sounds. I think you just described my dream game. Like as someone who played through Res Infinite in VR, and loves that music.
I don't think it is in VR, but you get the gist.
It doesn't matter. Like you described that perfectly.
So as you can imagine from that description, there are going to be drums and there's going to be bass. And it's honestly among the best sounding breakbeat music I've heard recently in a video game. There's a Gymnopédies acid remix in there. So that's very famous romantic piano song. So there's an acid remix in there. But it's not... it's not just that, because the whole soundtrack is 60 tracks long and explore electronica, Eurodance, dubstep, and even there's one punk rock track out there. And it's, I think, one of my best findings of 2024 so far.
Works so well, because you've got one of like the most famous, just beautiful songs ever, like ultimate chill song, and then all of a sudden it's got this wild breakbeat acid mix behind it, but it works. Like I don't know if that's been done before, if anyone had done that before. People probably have, but that was my first time hearing that, and just naturally you wouldn't put those two songs, like those two types of music together. Like
Yeah, me neither.
It's just wild. Another one, and I think this out of all of the songs
that's the most surprising, I think.
This was like, break my case.
Yeah, I want to talk about one of my most recent finds, and I attribute this one 100% to VGMDB, because I would have missed this album if the community weren't so active there. So yeah, have you ever heard of a Japanese match-free game called Break My Case?
I have absolutely not.
Yeah, me neither. Before listening to its soundtrack. So last month, the game's publisher released 6 different albums. I, of course, listened to them all. And
6?
6 albums. Well, it's short album. It's maybe 10 tracks per album. But yeah, I listened to them all. I love them. Each volume explore a very different genre. The first one is more disco and 80s inspired dance music. Volume 2 is more hip-hop and funk. Volume 3 is jazz music and so on. But I want to take you all the way to the 6th and last volume. Once again, I've never heard that in a video game before, but it's basically as if the prog metal band Polyphia scored a video game.
It's literally wild. And is this the track Rain?
Yeah, it is the track Rain. It just sounds so cool. Of course, it's not as technical as a proper Polyphia song, but just to imagine that in a video game, I am losing my mind. I never heard that before.
It reminds me of because I know we've got bands like Polyphia and Chon and stuff like that
Chon,
kind of fall into that techie, like mathy prog thing, but I feel like a lot of that music also exists in Japan, but within anime instead. Do you know what I mean? So do you know anything about the artists who like worked on these tracks? Like, do you know if they're big artists in Japan or anything, or are they just composers, like game composers?
No, for Break My Case, I think the studio hired different performers, but they are not necessarily very big shots, you know. I didn't find anything really relevant about the artist that performed the guitar part on this track. Yeah, I think it's Yui, Y-U-I, I think. And no, I don't think they are very famous, but that's a trend actually on Japanese and even Chinese mobile games to pick very unknown to the public artists, so they can hire them for cheap, I guess. But they deliver a really good job on the different soundtracks of Break My Case.
And I know we said 3, but you know what? Pierre sent me a playlist of I think 15 tracks.
12 to 50. Yeah,
yeah, and genuinely, like, I loved every single track on here. I'm just going to put a link to this track list in the episode description, so anyone listening to this now can also dive in. Tell me about Trend Tracks, whatever this is, because there were 3 tunes that you sent me that you look at the album artwork and it gives the impression it's going to be kind of like minimalistic. It's either going to be minimalistic kind of like house or something like that, or it's going to be like weird, funky, like acoustic guitar, which actually it is. And this is like a common thing actually in all of the songs that you sent me. There's a lot of really impressive guitar work. And
absolutely. I think it's probably the more niche album I sent to you because it's from a game within a game. Let me explain. So the game is called Tren, T-R-E-N, and it's the last game from Media Molecule, the studio that made Tearaway, Little Big Planet, and
sick.
Dreams. and Dreams. And actually, Train is a game within a game, so you can only play it on PS4 via Dreams. It's an experience they made for the game Dreams. And it released last summer, I think. So for starters, the album on streaming platform is called Train Tracks, and that's a very nice pun, I thought.
I like that. It's good.
And so, yeah, the music is composed by in-house composer Todd Baker and Ed Hargrave, and this is just a delight. It gives off 1980s bad commercial vibes, you know?
It does, yeah, no, I feel you.
It really sounds a bit corny, a bit dated, but it matches the game visual very well. It's impossible not to be seduced. And one particular track deserves, I think, all your attention. It's the beginning of the end. Even if it's just for its guitar solo near the end, you can basically see the composer having the time of his life shredding on his guitar. I just love it.
And you mentioned shredding there, and we can't not talk about this track considering you've just said the word shred. Like, you sent me another album from a game called Desta: The Memories Between, which, looking at the album artwork, looks like it's some sort of music game, or there's maybe music involved with the narrative. Like, what's this game about?
So I wanted to give it up for a game that had literally no traction whatsoever when it came out. It's called Desta: The Memories Between, and it's actually from the latest from the studio that made Monument Valley on mobile. It was released last year on Netflix, and it has an incredible soundtrack by Mansur Brown. That's, I think, about the game. It's like a tactical narrative game. It's a bit odd. It's maybe for that the game wasn't really covered by the press and the game, maybe because the style of gameplay was so different after Monument Valley, you know. But regardless, the OST is absolutely incredible. So Mansur Brown is not a VGM composer. He's a rising star of the UK new jazz scene. So if you like what Yusuf Days, Tom Misch, or Alpha Mist are doing, you have to listen to Desta soundtrack. So, of course, it's not as technical as a proper jazz album, but once again, I've never heard that in context of a video game before. So it was really a nice surprise to listen to that soundtrack.
No, and honestly, I'm feeling it. I've watched Alpha Mist twice live now, and their trumpet player makes me physically sick at how good he is. Like, it is absolutely. You just stand there shaking, just like how is he doing that? It's amazing to hear this sort of music in video games, and I would really hope that. Because I think there's a lot of people in the video game music community that maybe don't listen to that much music outside of games. And I think just as you did then by drawing comparisons to the likes of Alpha Mist, like, I would hope that people hear this music or just hear music in games in general and go off and listen to other stuff. I think, is that something you actually do in your newsletter where it's kind of like for fans of? Like, I swear I've seen that before.
I have a new type of content on my Patreon page, and it's called the banger of the week. And it's basically a non-VGM music recommendation. So it's a bit of an excuse for me. So I get to listen to other things than VGM soundtracks. But yeah, I can draw comparison between a video game soundtrack and, for example, I have listened to Yusuf Days because I've discovered Mansur Brown thanks to Desta. So yeah, definitely, this is a type of content I can do on Patreon. Yeah,
Yusuf Days is another one as well. Right, everybody listening to this, we have given you the absolute auditory delight of all of this amazing music. Patreon name is Now Playing. We will leave a link to that in the description. thank you so much for coming on, Pierre. Thank you for sharing this amazing music. You know what? I'm gonna have to get you on every month, I think, from now on, if it means getting a personalized playlist of music from now on. But if people want to check out what else you're doing outside of that, like where else can they head?
Yeah, basically on every major social media, I guess, on Twitter, on Blue Sky, and I have all the links on my website, so it's nowplaying.cool.
Awesome, Pierre. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure having you,
Matt.
on.
We are going to move on to Done in 60 Seconds, where we recommend something to each other, and we're going to try and limit what we say about it to just 1 minute. Whose turn is it to go first, Matt?
I believe it may be mine.
I think it's yours. I tried to lay a banger on you last time, and I don't think it quite hit. I'm still on my search for bangers, but you're gonna come at me first.
Right. I am coming at you with this. So, I've been making a conscious effort to check out game soundtracks from lesser-known consoles, which in this case means listening to game music released on home computers. So, one home computer I've been diving into is the PC98. Had a lot of Japanese exclusive games on it, such as Romance of the Three Kingdoms, which is composed by the incredible Yoko Kanno, best known for Cowboy Bebop, but she's also written music for a massive selection of games, anime, brand work for huge corporate brands as well. This track is called Burning Mount High, and it still sounds like a piece of video game music, but it has enough going on in terms of complexities that it could also hold its own in a symphony hall.
Look, Matt, it's like when I came in with some Shinji Hozoi last time. If you come in with Yoko Kanno, you're not exactly going to miss, are you? But that said, I hadn't heard these orchestral arrangements. And as you can imagine from Yoko Kanno, absolutely amazing, full of zest and inspiration. And she just, I don't think you could pay me to go back and play like an old strategy game that looks like it was fairly plodding at the time and must be almost inscrutable now. If it's even playable in English, I don't know, but fantastic music. So yeah, thanks for bringing this one in. Are you ready, Matt?
I'm ready.
I think I have a legitimate banger. Right, here we go. For fairly obvious reasons, for anyone who knows about what I've been working on, I happened to be listening to the Hitman Contracts soundtrack by Jesper Kyd. The game's from 2004. It is the third game in the Hitman series. And it has a banging soundtrack, a fan favourite, I would say. And some of the club music that Jesper Kyd, I mean, he's always making great electronic music from the beginning of his career. But, I mean, he really gets into it on this one. And I think it's very special. This track, I'm not one for like deep electronica much of the time, but something about the samples in this and the way it flows really, like, literally caught my ear instantly that I heard this album. So this is called Slaughter Club. It's by the legendary Jesper Kyd.
So, certified banger, you have found.
Yeah!
I like it because he has a way of producing music, not just writing it, that sounds horrible in the best possible way. So I don't know if you've heard this, but he wrote the music for a game called The Adventures of Batman and Robin.
Yes, yeah.
On the Mega Drive, and the way he distorts that chip and like it sounds like Sega techno. This is similar. My only one criticism is I feel like there's something missing. It's not giving me that, oh God, I want to get up and like dance. So because you sent me the link on YouTube, when we share music, we do YouTube links because it's easier to listen to. I clicked on the 1.25 speed to make it a little bit faster. And man, try it. Like that is the tempo this song needs to be at.
Fair enough.
Like I'm telling you, but no, this is good, and I'd never heard this before as well until you'd sent it. So undiscovered bangers are the best bangers for me.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you say that. Is Jesper Kyd the best all-round quote-unquote video game composer in terms of production and sound? And he can do orchestral, he can do choral, he can do electronic, he can do analog synths.
I think he does not get enough. Well, I was going to say he doesn't get enough attention for his analog work, but he does because people praise the Warhammer 40k Darktide soundtrack, which is like all synth. But I feel like a lot of people know him for the likes of, was it Jesper who did Assassin's Creed 2?
Yeah. I mean, he did Ezio's Family in Assassin's Creed 2, yeah.
Yeah, which is like that's like the Assassin's Creed song. Like that's the Assassin's Creed anthem, right? In terms of like, you've played that game, that's the song that people remember. But I feel like he doesn't get enough attention for stuff like The Adventures of Batman and Robin, which you if you picked that up in a retro store, you'd look at it and just think, just generic licensed like game kind of thing. But honestly, the soundtrack for that, MDK2 as well, which I think he worked on, there's a lot of very cool stuff that they're not really big IPs, but I think he almost approaches like every game soundtrack as if it's his last. Do you know what I mean?
That's a good way to put it, yeah.
He absolutely kills it. Just noticed as well, he's done some music for Soul Calibur 5, which I wasn't aware of, so I'm going to track that down after this because I'm a big Soul Calibur fan.
Yeah, do it. That's all we have time for on the GXM podcast. Thanks so much for joining us as we explore the intersection between video games and music. Please do be sure to subscribe and especially to share it with people you think might be interested, might enjoy it, and work especially in this sector or near this sector. Leave us a review on your podcast service of choice if you can, especially Apple Podcasts. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram at GXM Podcast. And if you've got any feedback, please do hit us up at gxmpodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks to 8 Beats Radio for amplifying the show. It was produced by both of us, edited by me. Music's by Zach Foster, and show art is by Joshua Klein. Anyway, right, I'll react now.